In 1935, only 1 in 10 American farms had electricity. The other 9 kept food cold, meat safe, and lamps burning using nothing but stone, salt, sawdust, and know-how passed down through generations. Then, the Rural Electrification Act arrived in 1936, and within 20 years most of these tricks were forgotten. But here's the twist. Number 4 on this list kept butter fresh for a week in July with 0 ice. And number 1? Food scientists today admit it does something a modern refrigerator still can't do. These weren't primitive shortcuts. They were engineering, worked out by people who couldn't afford to waste a single egg. Before we start, hit that subscribe button, because some of these still work better than the appliance in your kitchen right now. Let's count down 15 poor man's farmhouse tricks that ran on nothing but ingenuity. Number 15. The buried vegetable clamp. Before root cellars were dug deep, the poorest farms used the cheapest cold storage on earth, the ground itself. Come the first hard frost, a farmer would pile potatoes, turnips, and beets into a cone on a bed of straw, cover the whole mound with another thick layer of straw, then shovel 6 inches of soil over the top and pack it down. They called it a clamp. The earth held a steady temperature just above freezing all winter, and the straw let the vegetables breathe so they didn't rot. A little chimney of straw poked out the top to vent moisture. When the family wanted supper, they'd open one end, pull out what they needed, and seal it back up. No cellar to dig, no lumber to buy, no ice required. A clamp cost nothing but a morning's labor and kept a family and potatoes clear through to spring. The trick was drainage. Build it on a slight rise so meltwater ran off, and the crop stayed dry and firm for months. Get it wrong and you'd open a mound of black mush in February. Get it right and you had fresh food when the snow was 2 feet deep. It was the humblest cold storage imaginable, and it worked because dirt is a better insulator than most people ever realize. Number 14, the Haybox cooker. Here was a trick that let a woman cook a pot of beans while she was out in the field all day, using no fuel at all after the first 10 minutes. She would bring the pot to a hard boil on the wood stove, then bury it inside a wooden crate packed tight with hay. The lid went on, more hay was packed over the top, and the box was closed. The hay trapped the heat so completely that the food kept cooking on its own stored warmth for 6 or 7 hours. Dried beans, oatmeal, tough cuts of meat, a whole pot of stew, all of it came out tender by evening without another stick of wood burned. Farm wives called it a fireless cooker, and mail-order companies eventually sold fancy nickel-plated versions, but any family could build one from a packing crate and a bale of hay for free. The science is simple insulation. Cooking is just holding food at temperature long enough, and hay does that as well as any modern slow cooker. During both World Wars, the government actually promoted Haybox cooking to save fuel for the troops. A pot of dried beans that would have eaten hours of firewood now cost a handful of hay and a single boil. It freed up the stove, saved the wood pile, and had dinner waiting when the chores were done. Number 13, the pie safe. That tall wooden cabinet with the pretty punched tin panels wasn't just furniture, it was a working piece of food safety engineering. Every farmhouse had one standing in the coolest corner of the kitchen or out on the porch. The doors and sides were fitted with tin sheets pierced full of tiny holes, often in a star or a heart design. Those holes let air circulate around bread, pies, and cooked meat so they didn't sweat and mold, while keeping flies, mice, and dust locked out. Cheesecloth over a plate does the same job today, badly. The pie safe did it for a decade. Set in a draft, that constant flow of air actually cooled the food a little through evaporation. buying an extra day or two before anything spoiled. A fresh-baked apple pie could sit in there overnight and be perfect for breakfast. Some families slid a pan of cool water onto the bottom shelf to raise the humidity for their bread. The punched tin pattern that collectors now pay hundreds of dollars for was designed by a tinsmith for one reason: maximum airflow with the smallest possible opening. It's the same principle as the vents in a modern bread box, just older and a whole lot prettier. Before screens covered the windows, before refrigerators existed, the pie safe was how a farm kept a full day's baking safe from the entire barnyard. Number 12. Sand-stored carrots. Root cellars had a secret weapon most people have never heard of: a wooden box filled with damp sand. Carrots, parsnips, and beets pulled fresh in October would shrivel to rubber by December if you just left them on a shelf, because the dry cellar air pulled the moisture right out of them. So the farm wife layered them in sand instead. A shovel of slightly damp sand in the bottom of a crate, a layer of carrots not quite touching each other, more sand, more carrots, and so on to the top. The sand did two jobs at once. It sealed each root away from the air so it couldn't dry out, and it held a steady coolness and humidity that kept the carrots as crisp in March as the day they were pulled. Buried in sand, roots that would have lasted 3 weeks now lasted 5 or 6 months. No canning, no drying, no work at all beyond the packing. When you wanted carrots, you dug down and brushed them off. And here's the part that stings. A modern refrigerator still can't do this. The crisper drawer turns carrots to bendy sticks in a couple of weeks because a fridge constantly wicks moisture away. A box of damp sand in a cool corner beats it hands down, and it costs exactly nothing. Number 11. Water glass eggs. First pattern break, because this one sounds like witchcraft. Hens lay heavy in spring and summer and nearly quit in the cold months, so a farm that wanted eggs in January had to store the June surplus somehow. The answer was water glass, a syrupy solution of sodium silicate you could buy at any general store for pennies. The farm wife mixed it with boiled water in a big stone crock, then lowered clean, fresh, unwashed eggs into it, point down, until the crock was full. The water glass sealed every pore in the shell, locking out the air and bacteria that spoil an egg. Sunk in that crock in a cool cellar, the eggs stayed good for 8 months or more. In the dead of winter, when the hens had stopped and eggs cost a small fortune, she'd reach into the crock, rinse one off, and fry it like it was fresh from the nest. The only rule was that the egg had to be unwashed and never chilled first, because the hen's natural coating and the sealed shell were doing the work. Families put up 30 dozen eggs this way every summer. It's making a quiet comeback with homesteaders right now, and they'll tell you a 9-month-old water glass egg scrambles up just fine. Our great-grandparents banked eggs the way we bank money, put some away in the fat months to draw on in the lean ones. Number 10. The well as a refrigerator. Long before the icebox, the coldest spot on the whole farm was hanging down inside the well. A stone-lined well shaft stays around 50 degrees year-round, cooled by the water below and shaded from the summer sun. So the farm family used it as a refrigerator. Butter, milk, a jug of cream, a covered crock of leftover meat, all of it went into a bucket or a net bag and got lowered on a rope until it hung just above the water line. Down in that cool, damp shaft, milk stayed sweet through a hot afternoon, and butter kept its shape instead of slumping into grease. When supper came, you hauled the bucket back up. Some families even built a little shelf into the well wall for exactly this. The danger was obvious. Drop the butter, and it was gone, and you sure didn't want food falling into the drinking water, so the good crocks were tied off twice. But it cost nothing, and it ran on the simplest physics there is. Cold water pulls heat out of everything near it, and the earth around a well never gets hot. City folk paid the Iceman every single week for what a farmer got free from a hole in his own yard. That bucket on a rope was the original refrigerator, and half the country ran on it. Number 9. Drying racks and leather breeches. Every late summer farmhouse turned into a drying operation because sun and air were free and jars and ice were not. Apples were peeled and sliced into rings, strung on cotton thread, and hung across the kitchen or laid on screens in the loft until they turned leathery and sweet. Green beans got a needle run right through the pod and were hung in long ropes by the fire. Mountain families called these leather breeches, and they would swell back up into a rich, smoky side dish when boiled all winter. Corn was dried on the cob, pumpkin cut into spirals and looped over the rafters, herbs bundled and strung from the beams. Drying works because bacteria and mold cannot grow without moisture. Pull the water out and food simply keeps, sometimes for years, in nothing but a paper sack. A bushel of apples that would have rotted in a month became a winter's worth of pie filling and lunchbox snacks that took up almost no room. No fuel cost, no equipment, just patience and a dry spell. The whole house smelled of apples and sage for weeks. And here's a fact worth chewing on. Sun-dried fruit holds more concentrated flavor and sugar than the frozen kind, which is exactly why old-timers swore their dried apples made a better pie than anything fresh off the tree. Number 8. Potting meat in lard. Second pattern break, and this one makes modern food safety folks nervous, yet it fed farms for centuries. After butchering, a family couldn't eat a whole hog before it spoiled and had no way to freeze it. So they cooked cuts of pork low and slow until tender, packed them tight into a stone crock, and poured hot rendered lard over the top until the meat was completely submerged. As the lard cooled, it hardened into an airtight seal. No air meant no spoilage, and the crock sat in the cool cellar for months. When a meal was wanted, the wife dug down through the fat, pulled out a piece of rich, ready-cooked pork, and smoothed the lard back over the rest. The French do the exact same thing, call it confit, and charge you $30 a plate for it in a restaurant. On an American farm, it was just how you kept the pig feeding you all winter. The lard itself became the cooking fat for everything else. Biscuits, frying, greasing the pan. Nothing off that hog went unused. Every scrap of meat and every ounce of fat found a job. It was thrift raised to an art form. Meat kept safe for months with no cold, no cans, and no chemicals, just fat, a crock, and the good sense not to waste a thing. Number 7. The evaporative cooler. Here's a trick that made cold out of thin air, using nothing but water and a breeze. A farm family too poor for an icebox would build a simple frame safe, a cabinet with screen sides, drape it in wet burlap or an old wet cloth, and stand the feet in shallow pans of water. The cloth wicked the water up, and as the dry summer air blew through, that water evaporated. Evaporation pulls heat away, so the inside of the safe ran 10, even 15 degrees cooler than the air around it, cold enough to keep milk and butter through a hot day. The drier and windier the weather, the colder it got inside. Australians called their version the Coolgardie safe, but American homesteaders out on the hot, dry plains built the same thing from a packing crate and a feed sack. It cost nothing and needed no ice, no power, no moving parts, just a pan of water kept topped up. It's the very same physics that chills you when you step out of a lake into the wind, and the exact principle behind the swamp coolers still bolted to houses all across the Southwest today. A wet cloth and a breeze made a working refrigerator for a family that couldn't spare a dime, and on a dry July afternoon it kept the butter from turning to soup. Number 6. The sourdough crock. Store-bought yeast in a tidy packet is a modern convenience. The farm wife raised her own leavening and kept it alive for years. A crock of sourdough starter, just flour and water left out to catch the wild yeast floating in the kitchen air, sat near the warm stove as one of the most valuable possessions in the whole house. Feed it a little flour and water each day, and it bubbled and soured and lived indefinitely. A spoonful of that starter raised the day's bread, the biscuits, the flapjacks, the family's entire daily bread, with no store-bought yeast ever needed. Pioneers carried their starter across the country in covered wagons, sleeping with the crock on freezing nights to keep it from dying, because losing it meant losing your bread. Some family starters got passed down for generations, older than the children eating the loaves. That wild fermentation did more than make the bread rise. It made the grain easier to digest and gave the loaf a tang and a keeping quality that packet yeast can't touch. Real sourdough stayed good for a week, where store bread went stale in 2 days. It cost nothing to start and nothing to keep going but a daily spoon of flour. In a house with no refrigeration and no grocery run, a living crock of starter was daily bread insurance that simply never ran out. Number 5. The ice house. Now here's the clever one, because these families made summer cold last through August using ice they cut in January. When the pond froze thick, the men sawed it into great blocks, hauled them by sled to a small windowless shed, and stacked them with a foot of sawdust packed around every side. That sawdust was the whole trick, because it's such a good insulator that the ice barely melted, and blocks cut in the dead of winter lasted clear into the following fall. All summer, the family chipped off what they needed to fill the icebox, chill the milk, or crank out ice cream on a Sunday afternoon. A well-built ice house held enough to run a farm, and sometimes the neighbors too. It cost nothing but the winter labor of cutting and hauling, plus a pile of sawdust free for the taking from any sawmill. Think about the sheer nerve of it, storing winter itself in a shed for 8 months. The physics is just insulation and mass. A big enough block of ice, wrapped tight enough against the heat, simply can't melt fast. Whole towns ran a cash ice trade on this before electricity, shipping pond ice as far as the tropics packed in sawdust. On the farm, it meant cold milk in July drawn from ice that had been pond water in January, and not 1 watt of power spent. Number 4. The springhouse. This is the one from the top of the video, the trick that kept butter fresh for a week in the middle of July with no ice at all. If a farm was lucky enough to have a spring or a cold creek, they built a small stone hut right over the running water. The spring came up out of the ground at a steady 50-some degrees no matter the season, and it ran in a shallow channel across the floor of the house. Crocks of milk, butter, and cream sat right down in that flowing cold water, and the constant current carried the heat away as fast as the summer could add it. Milk stayed sweet for days, butter stayed firm, and cheese cured slowly on the shelves above. The thick stone walls and the earth-cooled water together made a room that stayed cold through the worst heat of the year. It was the refrigerator, the dairy, and the pantry all in one, running entirely on a stream that never stopped and never cost a cent. Farm families guarded a good spring like buried treasure and built the house of stone to last 100 years. Long after the power lines finally reached the countryside, some old-timers still swore butter kept in the springhouse tasted sweeter than anything from an electric icebox, and they weren't just being sentimental. That constant, gentle cold did the job beautifully. Number 3. Salt curing and the smokehouse. Third pattern break, and it's the reason a farm could butcher one hog in November and eat pork straight through to the following summer with no cold storage at all. First came the salt. The fresh hams, shoulders, and sides of bacon were packed in coarse salt, sometimes with brown sugar mixed in and left for weeks. The salt drew every bit of moisture out of the meat, and without moisture, the bacteria that cause rot simply cannot live. Then came the smoke. The cured meat was hung in a small shed while a low, cool fire of hickory or apple wood smoldered for days, coating the meat in smoke that dried the surface hard and left behind natural compounds that kept mold and insects away. A properly cured, properly smoked ham could hang from the smokehouse rafters for a year and only get better. This is how the whole country ate meat before refrigeration. A family could put up hundreds of pounds of pork every fall for the cost of salt and firewood and never lose a bite to spoilage. Country ham and real smoked bacon still fetch premium money today precisely because this slow method makes something no refrigerator ever could. Salt and smoke didn't just save the meat, they transformed it into something better than fresh. Number 2, the root cellar. The root cellar was the beating heart of every farm's winter survival, and it did something your kitchen refrigerator still cannot. Dug into a hillside or under the house, walled in stone and roofed with earth, the cellar held a steady temperature just above freezing, and just as importantly, a high humidity all winter long with no power whatsoever. Down there in the dark went everything the farm had grown: bins of potatoes, barrels of apples, crocks of kraut, sacks of onions, shelves of canning jars, hanging cabbages, boxes of sand-packed roots. The cold slowed everything down to a crawl, and the damp air kept the vegetables from drying out, so a good cellar held a family's entire food supply from October to April. Here's why it beat a fridge. A refrigerator keeps food cold but bone dry, which is exactly why produce wilts in a week in there. A root cellar keeps food cold and moist, the precise conditions that keep an apple crisp or a cabbage firm for 5 or 6 months. It ran on the constant temperature of the earth itself, free forever. A farmer could walk down those steps in February and gather potatoes, apples, onions, and a jar of last summer's beans for supper, all of it still good, all of it stored without a single watt. The whole farm ate all winter out of a hole in the ground. Number 1, the fermentation crock. And the number 1 poor man's trick, the one food scientists today admit does something a modern refrigerator simply cannot, is the humble fermentation crock. When the fall cabbage came in, the farm wife shredded it, salted it, and packed it down hard into a big stone crock, weighted with a plate and a clean stone so the vegetables stayed under their own brine. Then she just waited. In the cool cellar, the wild bacteria already living on the cabbage went to work, turning it into sauerkraut over a few weeks. The same crock made pickles, sour beans, and a dozen other keeping foods. And here is the part that beats every appliance in your kitchen. A refrigerator only slows food's decay. Fermentation transforms the food into something more valuable than what went in. The bacteria actually create new vitamins, boosting the vitamin C and the B vitamins in the cabbage, and fill the food with the living probiotics that keep a gut healthy. Sailors once beat back scurvy on barrels of farmhouse kraut. A crock that cost a few pennies of salt gave a family fresh, vitamin-rich vegetables in the dead of winter, safe for a year, no cold required, and left them healthier than fresh cabbage ever could have. Your refrigerator can only pause the clock. The fermentation crock turned scarcity into abundance and made the food better on the way down. That's why it earns the top spot, the poorest trick on the whole list, and the only one that gave back more than it stored. So there they are, 15 tricks that ran on nothing but salt, stone, sawdust, and hard-won cents. Every one of them worked because our great-grandparents couldn't afford for it not to. Try one this winter. Pack a box of carrots in damp sand or start a crock of kraut and see if the old ways don't still beat the machine humming in your kitchen. Then tell me in the comments which one surprised you most, and if your own grandparents kept a springhouse or a root cellar, I want to hear about it, because these weren't just tricks. They were how a whole country fed itself in the dark, and that knowledge is worth keeping alive.